What's up everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we have 3 creepypasta stories for you all. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with a friend if you like. Stay safe and well. Peace.
It was a lovely fall afternoon with leaves crisp and fiery and nary a cloud in the sky. The sun shone gloriously in the deep cyan ether, giving off the perfect amount of heat, the kind where you can wear shorts comfortably without that unsettling chill on your legs, but you don't find yourself covered in sweat, unless you happen to be one of those who always seems to be sweating. I made my way to my last class for the afternoon. Having received word that my 5 p.m. biology lab had been cancelled, I was pretty happy about things. Just one boring economics lecture to go and I would be home free for a good 24 hours. Yep, I have Wednesdays off. I really love my schedule sometimes. As I made my way through the oppressive mob of students walking every which way, I noticed my best friend and roommate, Tom. I waved to him, but he didn't seem to notice. So, raising my voice above the dull roar, I said, "Hey, Tom." He lifted his head and his eyes darted over to me. We began to make our ways toward each other, and as we did, I noticed something strange about him. Tom wasn't giving off his usual air of douchebaggery. Not today, he's a bad guy, although he does have a certain arrogance to him. Couple that with an appearance that would put scumbag Steve to shame, and you have a snapshot of the guy your mother warned of. He had a heart of gold, though. Earlier that semester, he had snuck a dying kitten into our dorm. I mean, this thing was on the brink of death. And yet, somehow, Tom managed to nurse it back to health. And that's not even the most amazing part. He had 5 exams over the course of the 2 weeks he kept the kitten. He managed to ace all of them, which was quite an uncommon event for Tom, as his free time was spent more on cheap alcohol than expensive textbooks. Yeah, douchebaggery is an unfair word for Tom. I guess liveliness would be better, as he was full of life. But right now, he seemed out of it. In a sort of uneasy haze. He certainly didn't look this way Monday night, when he told me he was going to stay with his girlfriend for a couple of days. I pulled him aside and asked what the matter was. "Meh," he said. "I just haven't been able to sleep much lately. And I haven't been concentrating in class well either." "When have you ever concentrated in class?" I said jokingly. He faintly smiled at me. His look was tinged with a slight degree of pain, suggesting that maybe I had hit a raw nerve. "Actually, it's not just class. It's everything. Anything. I can't focus on anything." "You think you might be developing a case of AD or ADHD?" "More like a case of trimulmfa." "Come again." "This ringing in my ears won't leave me the fuck alone." Clearly, I chuckled. "I'm serious. It's this obnoxious high-pitched hum. The kind of thing you would normally dismiss as an effect of listening to music too loud. Only, it seems to be coming from something else. Like, I don't know, it's like there's something in my head. And I mean, something in my head. When did you first notice it? Have you been to a doctor?" "No, and yesterday morning." I dismissed it as just me being hungover. "If I was talking to anyone else, I'd ask why you were out drinking on a Monday," I said in a last-ditch effort to lighten the mood. But he didn't even give much of a response to that one. Just a look that said, "Are you gonna let me finish?" Tom continued anyway. I felt like shit, so I skipped out on class. And as the day went on, I began to feel better. But the ringing, that ringing, it got louder, slowly, as if someone, somewhere was turning up the volume. The funny thing is, every time I notice it getting louder, I get a little more uneasy. "Well, I'm heading to class," I interrupted. "I'm heading back to the dorm." "Wrong answer. You said dorm. You need to see a doctor." "I would," his voice trailed off. But, I feel like I would make no difference." "How?" "Somehow, my fate is sealed. Since Halloween was a few days away, I normally would have attributed this to Tom's rise in tushiness around this time of year. He always gets into the spirit of the holiday, so far in that his stupid pranks have thus far cost him 2 relationships and an all-night trip to the hospital when he literally gave old man Johnson a heart attack. Thank God he made a full recovery. Point is, he likes to scare people. But what scared me more than his words was the look in his eyes. It was a frightening look that I had never seen from him before. After class, instead of going for dinner, I went straight to the dorm, where I found my roommate lying on the bed, a blanket covering his face. I saw on his desk a prescription for some antibiotic with the bottle on top. It looked like Tom had taken a few, probably more than the recommended dose. Tom tended to that. I felt a little bit of weight lifted off me. Some, but not much. Ever since I had seen him earlier that day, I had been worried. What was wrong with Tom? Why did he have that look in his eye? What did he mean by fate is sealed? What is up with all of this? Tom moaned. He groaned. Softly, quietly. Suddenly he leapt out of bed and onto the floor, screaming with the whirling hysteria of a madman. His deafening scream lasted almost 30 seconds, and it was a blistering screech the likes of which sounded almost inhuman. I nearly pissed myself in fright, listening to that awful sound. That wretched screech. It was hideous beyond imagining. I shudder even now thinking about it. The worst thing about it, like before, were his eyes. They had rolled back into his head and the veins and arteries within were beginning to leak. Just when I thought I was about to plunge into insanity myself, he stopped. Breathing heavily, Tom looked up at me. All I could do was look back at him in silence. Those eyes. Those glowing red eyes. And the screeching, his voice escalated. My God, the screeching. It won't stop. It won't stop. It's so loud. Can you hear it? Can you? You must be able to, you must. You must. It's so loud. Calm down. I shouted. Take your medicine and calm down. For fuck's sake, calm down. Can't you hear it? He repeated. It's blaring. Oh God, make it stop. Make it stop. His eyes started to roll up again, and in pure fear and rage, I grabbed my backpack, which held several heavy books, and hit Tom on the head. Hard. Then again. Then again. Tom mumbled something else about eyes before he passed out. Is everything all right in there? Asked Corey, the RA. I heard some god-awful noises just a minute ago. Lot of people out here are concerned. I went to the door, I told Corey what I knew and everything that had just happened. We both agreed we needed to get him to the psychiatrist's office and fast. So we picked him up and put him in Corey's truck. Once there, we got Tom out of the flatbed. He was asleep, but not sleeping peacefully. He kept mumbling "Oh God" or "the eyes" or some other unintelligible garble. I was disturbed on so many levels. After almost 3 hours of waiting at the office, Dr. Shannon gave us unsettling news. Not about the terrible screams. Corey and I could hear that oral carnage for ourselves. No, what Dr. Shannon told us was more disturbing, that those moments of screaming madness were all they could get out of Tom when he was awake. They had given him a strong sedative and were prepared to move him into the asylum the next day. In the meantime, he would have to be taken somewhere to rest. I sat at the foot of Tom's bed crying. Of all the things to come out of nowhere, of all the tragedies that could have happened, why Tom? Why now? Why like this? Somehow, the thought of Tom dying in a car accident or having his throat slashed brought me comfort. At least then he wouldn't have to be tortured like this. Constantly, he mumbled about the eyes. Always the eyes. Red eyes. And the screeching. Unnatural screeching. Otherworldly screeching that he begged would rob him of his hearing, but never did. At 4:36 that morning, Tom shot up out of bed. Exhaustion had driven me into a light sleep long since, and I was startled by the sudden movement. But I wasn't concerned. He'd sat up like this 4 or 5 times before since I had been watching. That sedative they had given him was awfully powerful. They said it would keep him down at least until noon. Of course, the dose they had given him to accomplish this feat was near fatal. Hopefully it didn't kill him. As long as he was alive, there was still some chance that they could figure out just what kind of little spider had crawled into Tom's head. Hopefully, his healing could start around noon. But it didn't. Because, at 4:36 Tom began screaming again in a tumultuous rampage. My head. The burning. The eyes. The screeching. My head. My head. My head. My goddamn head. In utter shock and horror, I witnessed the gruesome atrocity unfold before me in slow motion. What took less than 15 seconds slowed to agonizing hours to me. First, his eyes rolled back and the veins leaked as they had before, the demonic shriek still piercing the black air. Then the veins in his head throbbed, and I heard an even more disturbing sound. Underneath the horrendous hell shriek was the sound of someone, something, eating, sloppily munching on some kind of wet morsel. It took me a moment to realize just what that sound was. As the sound began to intensify, Tom's blood-stained whites bulged from his sockets and at last exploded, resulting in an eruption of crimson life. Then came the spiders. I don't know what else to call these things, but spider definitely comes the closest. They were tiny, almost furry creatures with multiple legs. But the worst thing about them was the eyes. Those soul-piercing red eyes that glowed with some disturbing, otherworldly, underworldly aura. Oh God, those hellish eyes. Now, I understood what Tom meant about the eyes. But even that wasn't the worst thing about the spiders. In the pale glow of the digital clock beside Tom's bed, I could see they were gnawing little chunks of something. And suddenly, it dawned on me. They were eating Tom's brain. The next thing I knew, I was in my bed, scared voiceless and shitless from the ordeal that had seemed so vivid just a second ago. I took a certain comfort in the very possibility that this hellish nightmare might have been a dream, but I was scared to look at the bed across the room, for fear of seeing Tom's eyeless corpse. I debated whether or not to do it for a while. A long while. Then, for some insane reason, I decided to check Tom's bed. Empty. I heaved a sigh of relief. For the time being, I could count this off as the most fucked up dream I had ever had. I even chuckled a little. That chuckle grew into a laugh. And I laughed for a good long while. I couldn't wait to tell Tom when he got back. I laughed and giggled and chuckled some more. And when I was done, I noticed I felt a little odd. A bit uneasy. I heard, like a sort of hum or ringing in my ears that seemed to come from in my head. When I was 8, I decided that I wanted to be a ghost hunter. At that tender age, I was torn between the terrifying excitement of being alone in a haunted house at night, and the soothing reality that there was probably nothing to be afraid of. My mother always told me spooky stories of the ghosts she had seen, or heard, or felt. And as much as I wanted to believe, I still had doubts. I wanted to get to the bottom myself and know for sure. When I was in college, I met Saber. His real name was Marshall Bailey, but people called him Saber because of the animal striped tribal tattoos on his neck and his cat-like gait. We began talking in our cryptozoology class. Saber had a knack for knowing more about some of the creatures than our professor. I learned that he was a paranormal photographer, and after weeks of getting to know each other, he brought me onto his ghost hunting team. There were 5 of us. Julie, the electronic voice phenomena expert, EVPs, Jonathan, who had all the thermal imaging equipment to monitor changes in temperature and electromagnetic fields. Sal had the connections to get us into popular haunted locations. Saber was there to film it all, and then you had me, the skeptic. Saber felt that it was important to have an objective person in the group to keep a level head. Saber had been building his team for months before he was finally ready for the first assignment that would take place during spring break. We were headed nearly 800 miles away to a small town in Louisiana. When the flat expanse of Indiana turned into the sprawling green of the South, we knew we were almost there. We left on Friday, and after 3 long days, we emerged from the van. We were here. Hotel Verona. Hotel Verona had been abandoned since 1971. Once, a popular stop along the way to New Orleans, now was a dark stain in a quiet village. Having done my research, I knew that the hotel had been built by the wealthy Martin Vasseur in 1948. Named after his wife, Verona was known for its aesthetic grandeur, luxurious creature comforts, and some of the best Cajun cuisine in the area. During its first decade, many famous faces and well-to-do travelers made sure to spend the night at the hotel and dine within the exclusive club, Adelaide. During the 1960s, however, Vasseur had financial trouble, and the addition of new major highways routed traffic away from the elegant Verona. After gambling heavily to try to revive some of his fortune, Vasseur lost most of his money by 1968. His wife caught pneumonia soon after and died, leaving him alone and penniless. The Hotel Verona hadn't had a guest since June 1971, and on a quiet night in August, Martin Vasseur shot himself in the lounge of the lovely Adelaide. Without an interested buyer, Verona's beauty faded away. In 2008, a historical society tried to renovate the old hotel, but strange noises, injuries, and reports of being unable to remove artwork scared away the workers. Some believed that it was the ghost of Martin Vasseur, protecting his original masterpiece. Others thought the hotel already beheld a sinister presence, one that brought financial ruin to Vasseur and death to himself and his wife. This theory would explain why the hotel has seemed to deteriorate so much in just a few decades. The stories and the pictures did not do the hotel justice. Through the faded design and obvious signs of years of neglect, it was easy to see the impressiveness of the Verona in its time. Saber stared at the monument with a sort of reverence. I smiled, excited for the night and ready to investigate. Entering through the ornate French double doors into the lobby, we immediately smelled the stagnant air. It had been a while since a breeze had penetrated this fortress. Dust covered every inch of the main floor, from the oversized concierge station to the grand ballroom. Occasionally, a critter would scurry off to safety. We decided to first set up the equipment in the old Adelaide restaurant and nightclub, where Vasseur killed himself. It was in the basement of the hotel, and since the elevators were no longer working, we had to lug the machinery down a flight of dusty, creaky stairs. I was the first into the club. All of the intimate, clothed tables sat along one of 4 tiers, looking down onto a stage. You could almost hear the Louisiana jazz playing as the finely dressed waiters served French wine and spicy jambalaya and prawns. As Julie, Jonathan, and Saber set up their equipment, Sal and I passed out sandwiches. Our clocks showed that the sun would be setting anytime. It didn't take long before we started getting some activity. Julie's EVP monitor started picking up some sounds very soon after dark. In that old abandoned place, it was easy to feel like we were not alone. After listening to the playback on her monitors, Julie played her audio recording for the group. A woman's voice was heard whispering, "Trahi. Trahi." Sal asked, "What is that?" "It means betrayed," Saber spoke up from behind his camera. "My grandmother was French. I thought the sound was spooky, but not definitive proof of anything paranormal. It was going to take more than that to make a true believer out of me." After almost an hour of dormancy, we decided to move upstairs to the ballroom on the first floor. I was surprised at how different the lobby looked in total darkness. Without the golden sunshine bouncing through the glass, there was a much more sinister look about it. Only the light of our flashlights could distinguish color. In the ballroom, Julie didn't pick up any more voices, but Jonathan was able to detect some strange temperature changes throughout the room. I chalked that up to holes in the infrastructure, or maybe some animals had taken up shelter in the walls. We grew bored after a while and decided to explore the upper floors of the hotel. Saber suggested that we split up, to maximize time. Julie was going to record audio on the second floor, Sal would use a small, handheld camera on the third floor, Jonathan would monitor temperature on the fourth floor, and Saber and I would film the fifth floor at the top. We would all be connected with walkie-talkies. Everyone set up on their respective floors. Saber asked into the walkie. Yes was the resounding answer. We were to walk up and down the hallways, and try to communicate with any potential spirits in any open rooms. As I walked next to Saber in the dark, I began to feel an electric charge. I didn't realize my level of attraction to him until we were alone in this creepy place. I think he felt the tension too because he inched closer to me as we walked, his arm brushing against mine occasionally. So, you speak French? I asked timidly. Yes. My grandmother taught me when I would spend summers with her in Lyon. Do you really think that was a voice we heard speaking French in the restaurant? Don't you think it could have been the wind or something? I was even beginning to doubt myself as the full spookiness and excitement of the moment filled me. I wanted to believe in ghosts. Of course. Don't you? He gave me an amused look. His eyes seemed really excited. I could tell this was exactly where he wanted to be. The hunt gave him some kind of high. I'm really not sure. But it makes it seem more real, being here with you. What do you mean? Saber asked earnestly. He moved closer, facing me. Our faces were inches apart now. I swallowed and said, I think that I might be getting caught up in the moment. I was interrupted by the sound of Julie's walkie. Guys, I've just picked up something strange. You might want to get down here. We moved apart instantly, the momentary spell broken. As we head down the hallway to the stairs, another walkie crackles. You won't believe what I just saw, said Jonathan excitedly. Same here, replied Sal. We can't come to every floor. What is going on? Saber shouted into our walkie. He and I looked at each other in disbelief. Suddenly, a low rumbling could be heard from the back of the hallway, just as a light began to grow from nowhere. Saber and I moved toward the sound and the light while he shined his camera at the source. The rumbling grew louder and the light brightened. I could tell as we got closer that they were coming from an open door at the end of the hallway. Now there was a high-pitched keening sound along with the rumble, and the bright light was not one, but many bright shapes emptying out of the room into the hallway. I backed away from the room as the human-sized shapes came closer. Saber! I shouted over the noise. Let's go. I pulled on his arm but he was mesmerized by the sight. It took many pulls and shoves and shouting before he snapped out of it and ran back down the hallway with me. On the way down the stairs, we ran into Jonathan and Sal. As we raced to the second floor for Julie, the entire hotel felt as if it was shaking, the booming sounds as loud as ever. The lights from the top floor had reached the staircase and were slowly descending. Julie! Julie! We yelled as we neared the second floor, into the walkie-talkie. Meet us by the stairs. We have to get out now. I'm outside by the van, Julie said, confused, as we heard Julie's voice also say, I'm on the second floor. Come see what I just found. We all stared at each other in horror. What the hell was that? Yelled Julie through the first channel on the walkie. I'm outside, that wasn't me. We raced to the first floor and out the glass double doors into the night. All sounds stopped instantly, save for our hard, hurried breathing. Looking back at the Verona, I was shocked to see stillness, and black. There were no lights moving on the floors anymore. We piled into the van and drove several miles before any of us could speak. Julie was the first to break the silence. I was never on the second floor. I went outside to the van first to get more batteries because my walkie-talkie died. When I tried to get back in, the door was stuck. That's when I heard you guys screaming. What was that? She slowly shook her head. We heard you earlier on the walkie too. You told us to come down right before, well, whatever hell that was. And Jonathan and Sal said they saw something too. Saber recalled. No, I never said anything. My walkie died right after I heard Julie. Jonathan said as he looked fearfully at Sal. Mine too, said Sal. This is messed up. I heard loud noises upstairs and ran to find you guys. I ran into Jonathan just seconds before you two appeared. Why was it impersonating us? Asked Julie. It sounds like it wanted to get us to the second floor, said Saber. It was silent for a while after that. The trip back home was uneventful, and we made it in 2 days instead of 3. None of us felt like stopping. I lost contact with the group after that. I think we all just wanted to forget the experience. We were amateur ghost hunters and none of us were prepared for what happened. As it turned out, none of the equipment had worked properly and all footage and recordings were lost. It was easy to pretend that it was all a nightmare after that. I don't know anymore whether I believe in ghosts, but I know now that I no longer want to. Rain fell in small silver pools in the bottoms of potholes that lined the city roads, and bejeweled the apartment windows with tiny liquid beads. On her wooden desk, old turpentine-soaked rags and crusted paintbrushes cluttered the space. The room was dim, except for a light that was clamped on her easel, pointed toward an empty canvas. As her paintbrush danced across the canvas, leaving behind thick globs of color, she began to feel disheartened. On this day, she was particularly uninspired by the still life of plastic fruits and glass bottles she had set up on the windowsill. Art was the coals that fed the flames in Julianne's soul. Painting was the only thing that made her feel like an accomplished human being. She glanced over at her bookshelf and instantly, one book in particular caught her eye. It was one on how to paint landscapes. She thumbed through the pages until she came across a photo of interest, a picture of a forest. Julianne paused for a second, thinking of a way to approach this new painting. She looked around the room at the stacks of unfinished works. I need a change, she thought, and with her newfound inspiration she packed up her supplies, a bag full of assorted brushes, a few blank canvases, and her easel, and kissed her black and white cat Ash on his nose. She packed her things into the back seat and got into her Jeep. By 3:00 p.m., the rain had halted, but the gloomy atmosphere still persisted and a thin blanket of mist yet lingered. Julianne drove out of the city past apartment buildings and concrete districts until the surroundings became increasingly suburban, and eventually, wooded. After a half hour of driving, the state forest sign appeared ahead and she turned into the parking lot. She stepped out of the vehicle and inhaled, taking in a lungful of the late October chill. She threw on a jacket over her hoodie, tucked her fold-up easel under her arm and slung her bag of art supplies over her shoulder. There was a 15-minute walk along the train tracks that ran parallel to the forest's edge to get to the opening where Julianne wanted to enter the woods. As she walked further and further down the path, she noticed how although most of the leaves were gone from the trees, the forest was still thick with thicket and thorn bushes. The forest was beautiful though, and Julianne was happiest when she was in the wilderness, among all things natural. The path twisted and turned around bare trees and fallen logs until she stopped at a stream. She became mesmerized by the crystal water that cascaded over the smooth rocks. A satisfied smile showed across her delicate features as she realized she had found the ultimate spot. Once the canvas was set up on the easel and her paints were out and ready, she lightly sketched the scene first, planning where she would carve the trickling creek through the brown forest on the canvas. She noted exactly where each tree would go, sketching the trunks softly, and where the tiny beams of sunlight would come streaming through the tree branches. It watched her. It monitored her every move. It curiously turned its head from side to side, watching its prey. The creature usually walked on all fours, but as it stalked her, it crouched on its scrawny hind legs. Its front limbs were curved, serrated scythes like that of a praying mantis. It only stood 3 feet off the ground, At most. It possessed 4 large black eyes on the top of its head, arranged like that of a spider's, 4 portals of inquisitiveness that stalked with the curiosity of a child, but with the malicious intent of a murderer. The sudden crunch of a branch a few yards away made Julianne turn around and scan the edge of the foliage directly behind her. There was nothing there, nothing that she could see, and so she went back to her artwork. It knew that its prey was becoming aware of its presence in the brush, and it knew it had to be cautious if it wanted to have a meal. It began to silently scale a tree, digging its mantis-like limbs into the bark. It crept out onto a tree limb overhanging Julianne and peered down at her, its bulbous eyes intensely stalking her. It picked up her delicious scent, and then it began to salivate. Nightfall was slowly encroaching on the dense forest, and Julianne was adding the finishing brush strokes to her new piece of artwork. A drop of liquid landed on her cheek and she brushed it off with the back of her hand. Julianne looked up at the forest canopy above her. There was nothing there, but a slight breeze blew through the trees and sent water droplets down to the forest floor. She began to pack up her things. It had since moved from the tree, and was now watching her from a greater distance. It was becoming desperate now. It needed to make a kill. The bloodthirsty thing decided to move in on her. As she was about to sling her bag over her shoulder, a screech erupted from the dark brush and she shot straight up. Did she just imagine that? Her subconscious wanted to tell her so very badly that the sound wasn't real, but her instincts were pleading otherwise. It sounded again, a blood-chilling, high-pitched shriek that lasted for 4 seconds. It wasn't earthly at all. Everything about the sound was alarming and it gave her goosebumps. Something was moving toward her in the distance, the underbrush rustling with every step. It started out slow-paced, and then picked up speed. Something was darting towards her. Julianne, being a skilled outdoors woman, decided she wasn't going down without trying, and so she ran in the opposite direction. Ripping through thorn bushes and tree branches, she was sprinting as fast as she could possibly run. She heard the noise again, but this time it was more of a groan. It was only a couple of yards ahead of her. Ahead. She thought to herself. This thing is swift. She strained her eyes in what was now turning into darkness. The sun was sinking away behind the trees. She was left alone, without the comfort of day. A tear streamed down her cheek, past her chin, and gently fell to the ground. She could not speak. She could not move. She could only watch as a clawed forelimb curled around the trunk of an evergreen tree in front of her, and then a second limb appeared. Whatever the thing was, it was clinging to the other side of the tree, hanging there a few feet above the ground. Julianne stood there for a while, tears silently pouring out. She was still paralyzed with fear and could only stand there, forced to watch. The creature made its way down the tree trunk to the forest floor and inched toward her. As it neared, she could barely breathe. The hellish thing was so hideous. She tried to utter "Oh my God," but all that came out of her was a whimper. The creature was now directly in front of her, and it was making sounds almost like radio static, as if it were responding to her whimpers. Her eyes widened as its own empty eyes peered up at her. It began clicking its insect-like mandibles together, ready to seize her. It fiercely roared and screeched, slicing its front limbs through the air. As Julianne put out her hands to defend herself, she was knocked back by the force of the thing, and she tumbled backward, slamming her head on a large stone. Laying on her back, she began to drift away. She could only feel defeated as she watched the disturbing creature crawl towards her. She closed her eyes and prepared herself to be devoured. A thick fog permeated the forest and sunlight penetrated the forest canopy, signaling the arrival of day. The sun's rays beat down on Julianne's pearly facial features and warmed her cold skin. Her eyes opened wide in sudden terror and she inhaled deeply, coming out of shock. She lay there for a while with her red hair wet and matted to her face, then sat up and looked around. Cardinals and blue jays were singing in the canopy above. It was an altogether brighter day, and she was ecstatic and grateful to be alive. Julianne took off her jacket and checked her body. To her utter surprise, she had no wounds other than a few minor scrapes from the thorn bushes. The creature had left her alone. Barely able to stand up, she limped down the path and made her way through the woods. Shrouded in dense mist, the forest now seemed more like a fairy tale. The way back to the parking lot was a long one for Julianne as she marched along the train tracks, head held high, and made it to the Jeep. She put the keys in the ignition and sped towards the city. All Julianne could do when she got home was crawl under the covers while her mind raced. What the hell had attacked her? Where did it come from and why was it there? It was obvious the horrid thing was not of Earth, or at least the elusive predator had not been discovered until now. Something began to scratch and claw at the bedroom door. Julianne lost her breath and began to shake. She started to sob again and watched in horror as the door creaked open and a dark figure darted across the bedroom floor. She pulled the covers tightly over her head as she felt it crawl into bed with her, and then it began to purr. "Ash," she proclaimed, pulling the blanket off. Her cat licked her cheek. She had never felt so relieved in her life. She hugged Ash and wept, rocking back and forth. She kissed the tuxedo cat on his white paws and on his neck. The feeling of relief subsided when she caught a glimpse of two mantis-like forelimbs slowly curl around the doorframe.